Hello there. I'm glad you made it here. Perhaps the world has been loud today, full of small demands and bright screens, and you've come looking for a little quiet, something slower, steadier, easy on the heart. You're in no hurry here. Nothing asks for more than your simple presence. Tonight, we'll wander gently into a moonlit thought experiment, the hush between the stars, and the idea some call the dark forest, a universe where wisdom often means listening more than speaking, dimming the lights and stepping softly. This isn't a tale meant to frighten. It's a slow, curious look at why the cosmos might be so quiet, and why patience and caution could be the oldest survival tools in the universe. As you rest, I'll keep the pace unhurried, the edges rounded, the science folded into a lullaby. If these calm journeys help you drift or simply ease the mind, a light tap on like and subscribe would be a kindness. It helps other sleepy travelers find their way here. For now, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin our night wander among the stars. Imagine lying under a clear sky only tonight. The sky is the gentle dark behind your eyelids. Let it open slowly, like theater curtains parting to a hush. At first there's just velvet quiet. Then, stitch by stitch, tiny lights take their places, patterns forming, depth unfolding behind depth. Each small spark is a sun with weather of its own and, perhaps, a family of worlds turning with patient breath. From this calm shore of blankets and pillows, you can hear the softest surf of space and picture the hidden coasts beyond the horizon of night. The numbers can feel like wind present, steady and hard to hold. Hundreds of billions of stars just within our Milky Way, the spiral that cradles our little home. Trillions of galaxies arcing beyond it like a field of seeds cast from someone's open hand. Counting becomes a kind of poem that never ends. If you gave each star a single second of attention, the clock would outpace your lifetime, then your civilization, then your language, and still the counting would continue. So we set down the ledger and simply let it be vast. Vast is enough. In all that expanse, our instruments listen with the care of a librarian turning thin pages. Dishes of polished metal wait in deserts and valleys where the air runs clear. Spacecraft drift in long, slow ellipses, their antennas like cautious ears. The recordings spool out, hiss, whisper, the soft snow of natural radio. The cosmos is not empty, pulsars tick, hydrogen hums, but none of it has yet said, unmistakably, I am a mind and I am speaking. A different kind of silence gathers, not the hush of nothingness, but the quiet of unanswered invitation. A long time ago, during an ordinary lunch that history keeps replaying, Enrico Fermi asked a small question that opened into a canyon. Where is everybody? So simple you could tuck it inside a pocket. So heavy that it has worn grooves in the floorboards of thought. If the galaxy has had time enough for stars to live and die, for heavy elements to accumulate, for worlds to form and cool and season, then a few candles should have been lit by now. A few signals should be crossing the dark. Some evidence of neighbors should have brushed the curtains of our sky. Yet the dishes keep listening and the tape keeps hissing, and the question sits upright beside us through the night. To lean closer to an answer, we trace the delicate scaffolding that Frank Drake offered, less an equation than a constellation of ideas. It does not promise certainty. It hands us a lantern and invites us to walk more carefully. We begin with the rhythm of starbirth in the Milky Way, a slow, ongoing pulse. New suns still gather out of cold clouds. Some years a handful, some eras a rush. Long ago the galaxy was more feverish. nursery after nursery, lighting up in blue. Today, the pace is calmer, but it hasn't stopped. Each new star is a fresh stage, curtains parted, the play of chemistry and gravity, ready to begin again. Around those stars, planets seed themselves, like dew on a spider web. For a long time, we had only one example, and the suspicion that we were special. Now we know better. Worlds are common hot giants skimming close, cold giants drifting far, small rocky beads in tidy lines, or in eccentric dances that defy our early neatness. Many stars hold not one or two, but a full cabinet of planets, and the variety itself is a comfort. Nature is generous with the ingredients, even when the recipes surprise us. Among those worlds are zones of mildness, where liquid water can linger on a surface without fleeing to steam or freezing into stone. The habitable zone moves according to a star's warmth, closer for the dim red embers that burn and burn for ages, farther for bright blue flames that live fast and die young. Even this idea flexes when we look at worlds like Europa, where an ocean sleeps beneath ice and is kneaded warm by the pull of a giant. Habitability is a neighborhood with many back doors. From water and warmth and patience, we ask for one more gift, the first spark of life. Here, the path narrows and the map grows faint. On Earth, the timeline unfurled quickly once it could. Our planet cooled, the bombardments eased, and within a few 100 million years, something began to copy itself, to differ slightly, to keep records of its own building in molecules that remember. In the lab, we can coax amino acids and other organic companions out of simple gases with a jolt of energy, a miniature thunderstorm in glass. We can assemble lipids that make tiny bubbles like tentative cells. These are hints, not the full bridge. Chemistry can walk us to the riverbank, but the crossing into life remains misted. Was it inevitable once the table was set? Or did chance lean over the board with a grin and move the decisive piece? One world is not a crowd. Our sample size is a single heartbeat. Caution would ask us to assume life is rare. Even with rare, the galaxy does not empty out. Picture a meadow at dawn where only a few fireflies still glow. From far away you might see only one or two, yet the field is not bare. If even a tiny fraction of mild worlds wake into biology, there are still forests of microbes under strange suns, still skies where simple cells float like dandelion seeds. Life, once it begins, is stubborn. It eats sunlight and minerals, sips chemical gradients, makes a living from volcanic breath and oceanic vents. It threads itself into cracks, into ice, into the undersides of rocks. It is, at base, the art of staying. From persistence, we ask for minds, and here too, we move with care. Evolution is practical, not poetic. It tries what works and keeps the winners, and most of the time, the winners are small, efficient, and indifferent to algebra. For billions of years on Earth, the planet belonged to the single-celled, and by any measure of success, it still does. Intelligence is expensive. Brains burn fuel even in stillness, flickering like city maps seen from orbit. But the world is a workshop with many benches, and cleverness has been built more than once. Octopuses read puzzles with their arms. Crows design tools from memory. Dolphins pass along traditions. Elephants pause at bones. Conscious attention keeps arriving in different shapes, like a melody that returns in a new key. Civilization-level intelligence, the kind that stacks stones into observatories and later stacks signals into sky, emerged here along one narrow ridge. Was that ridge inevitable, or a lucky path cut by weather and time? we cannot say. Yet the pressures that make thinking useful, prediction, cooperation, the choreography of predator and prey, must play out on other stages too. Give a planet time enough, and seasons enough, tides and continents and storms, and minds may bloom where it is useful to bloom. Not everywhere, not quickly, and not all at once, but sometimes. Even with minds, the road to technology is not a straight avenue but a footpath that meanders. Humans told stories by fire for long ages before we told them by radio. Agriculture reshaped our days, then writing reshaped our memory, then machines reshaped our muscles, then science reshaped our questions. The interval between first spark and first transmission was, relative to the life of a star, brief. A few breaths on a cosmic scale, and we were already tossing narrow beams into space, already listening for echoes. That quickness tempts us to project our own tempo outward, to imagine the galaxy ticking in step. Yet history is fractal and local. Another world might dawdle lovingly in art and ethics for 1,000,000 years before noticing the spectrum of hydrogen. Another might skip straight from metallurgy to silence for reasons we cannot guess. So we multiply each uncertain fraction by the next, and we arrive not at a single number, but at a mood. The mood says there may be others, perhaps a few, perhaps many, waiting in their own nights with their own questions arranged neatly beside them. The mood also says that hearing each other is fragile. Signals spread and thin, civilizations rise and fold. The windows when two separate minds might overlap are small panes in a very large house. Imagine two lighthouse beams sweeping a foggy sea. They must cross at just the right instant for the boats to see one another's glow. Which brings us back to the listening and to the hush that can feel like a held breath. We expect noise, banners, grand works strung across starlight. We expect fireworks because we know how to make them, and we are fond of celebration. But perhaps the quiet is a choice. On a trail where you do not know what lives behind the trees, even the bold learn the value of soft steps. Light is a beautiful thing, and also a beacon. A signal can be a greeting or a map drawn on the dark saying here, and not everyone would find that comforting. There is a story people tell among themselves about a forest at night where every creature is both watcher and watched, where singing loudly is a declaration, and declarations can draw teeth. Whether the universe truly keeps such a forest is still a working theory, not a rule. Yet the caution in it has a certain weight. We know from our own history that new contact is not always gentle for the less prepared. None of this means fear must be our only lantern. It only suggests that patience could be the oldest survival trait, that silence can be a strategy rather than a void. A civilization might listen for 1,000,000 years, refine its astronomy until stars feel like acquaintances, learn to fold energy softly into its needs, and still leave no flamboyant signatures we would recognize from this distance. Another might turn inward to perfect the art of living, a technology of harmony that does not throw sparks into the dark. Another might shine brightly for a while and then go quiet again, like bioluminescence fading after a wave breaks. As you drift, notice that the paradox loosens when we soften our expectations. We looked out hoping for trumpets and parades, and instead found a cathedral of low murmurs, cosmic microwave afterglow, spectral lines, the slow pulse of variable stars. If neighbors exist, they may be shy, or patient, or busy with problems so beautifully solved that they make no mess for us to see. Or they may be rare, so rare that the intervals between one lantern and the next stretch beyond the current age of our listening. The silence that felt terrifying becomes under a kinder lamp, an open field at night where you cannot yet hear the faraway music, but the grass is cool and the air smells of old rain, and it is pleasant to wait. Count if you like, for the comfort of numbers. Let the math mark the edges of what we know, and place small flags in the fog. Then set the ledger aside again, and return to the view. The Milky Way arches like breath across the sky, and somewhere in that faint band there are worlds with dawns and laundry lines and lullabies, or perhaps only oceans still learning their weather. Our receivers will keep their patient watch, our equations will keep their careful book. Meanwhile, the night performs its slow, generous work of perspective, making all our questions sit still long enough to feel their shape. If there are answers, they will come on their own schedule, moving with the gait of starlight. Here, in the soft company of this quiet, it is enough to know that the universe is fertile, with places and more than old enough for surprises. It is enough to admit the limits of our hearing without surrendering wonder. It is enough to imagine, gently, that others might be out there listening too, keeping their lights low, tending their gardens under unfamiliar moons, and choosing, for now, to let the forest remain dark. And in that imagined dimness, there is a final piece we have to hold up to the light and turn slowly in the hand. How long any speaking stays audible. Among the quiet factors of the old lantern we borrowed, the star birth, the planets, the mild zones, the first sparks, the patient climb to minds and tools, there is one term that carries a weight out of proportion to its size. It asks, with a soft but insistent voice, how long a civilization keeps sending anything that another could detect. A season? A century? Long enough for language to change its clothes several times? Longer still, until mountain ranges seem to breathe? For us, the interval of outward sound has been short. A little more than 100 years of radio and radar, a handful of decades of strong, tidy beams, from dishes the size of swimming pools, some television snow drifting outward like pollen. 1,000 years would be generous, 1,000,000 would be a legend, an arc of culture and caution that learns to live with its own power and refuses the temptations that end stories early. The unsettling thought is that the same cleverness that opens the door to stars also gives a species new ways to hurt itself and its home. The match that lights the kiln can light the field. In that uneasy overlap between first transmission and first true wisdom, the window may be narrow. When people feed the lantern with numbers that are neither dreamy nor dour reasonable guesses for each step, the result keeps landing, not in emptiness, but in abundance. Not one or two, but perhaps thousands of speaking cultures in a single spiral like ours, not merely in deep pasts or far futures, but breathing now, under other moons, with their own kinds of long memory and local humor. Many would be older. Much of the galaxy had time to build and cool and turn green long before our oceans found their rhythm. 1 billion years of head start is a staggering slope to climb with the imagination. In 1 billion years, a creature can learn to make stones sing, learn to borrow momentum from the wind between the stars, learn to live on timescales that make empires look like summer storms. If such neighbors exist, their signatures ought to glow. We have been listening carefully since a summer in 1960, when a small team pointed a patient ear at 2 friendly suns and waited. The tapes from that early vigil were as quiet as a library at closing. Decades later, our listening has become both broader and more precise. Receivers comb the sky with fine-toothed algorithms, separating the natural voices pulsars that tick with the steadiness of old clocks. mazes that whistle from clouds of excited molecules from anything that might carry the geometry of intention. We have added optical vigilance, too, hunting for needles of coherent light, tiny strobe lights that could hop the distances more efficiently than radio. We look for waste heat on grand scales, a star muffled in infrared by a swarm of harvesters, or a galaxy using more energy than its starlight alone can account for. The notebooks keep filling with natural marvels, and the column for artifices stays blank. The hush persists. Meanwhile, our own house has not been silent. Since the first broadcasters learned to fling music and news across continents, we have been decorating a bubble that grows at the speed of light. Radar pings, navigation beacons, old sitcoms, the bright shouts of planetary radars aimed at the moon and the nearby asteroids, they all run outward, thinning but real. The bubble is about 100 light years in radius now, a translucent sphere, catching more and more star systems each year. Within it sit tens of thousands of suns on the order of 15,000, each with its retinue of worlds and small bodies, its potential for someone to sit up late and tune the sky the way we do. If any of those someones are listening with tools like ours, the ripple of our presence has brushed their instruments. The map has a pin where we live, and still no reply has ever stood up and bowed. It is tempting to soften the ache of that silence with comfortingly small possibilities. Perhaps life is an ember that rarely catches. Perhaps minds that stack stones into observatories are rarer still. Perhaps cultures with radios are flares that sputter and go cold too quickly to overlap. There is a school of thought that gathers many of Earth's peculiar gifts into a single wreath of luck. A moon, large enough to steady our seasons. A big outer planet that vacuums or jostles long-period ice and stone into safer orbits. A crust that creeps and dives, cycling carbon between sky and rock so that temperatures do not run wild. A quiet galactic neighborhood far from the crowded hazards near the center, but rich enough in heavy elements to build continents and creatures. The list is longer, and the list is persuasive. Our story, it says, threaded a narrow canyon between floods and droughts of fate. The canyon is real. Our climate has been tipped and righted more than once. Oxygen was a poison before it was a power source. Mass extinctions scoured the tree of life and made room for new branches. A single stone from the sky changed which branch learned to carve flutes. Even so, the sky is not a small place. If the chance for minds like ours were as low as rolling a row of dice and asking for all sixes, there have still been more throws than any fair casino would tolerate. Trillions of stars in the part of the universe we can see, and perhaps far more in what we cannot. Even when you scale down, expectations only a tiny fraction of stars with mild planets, only a tiny fraction of those with life, only a tiny fraction of those with minds the multiplication refuses to dwindle to zero. Rare does not easily handle silence this complete. It also binds us to our own recipe. We are water and carbon, yes, but that is because our pantry held those staples, and our stove ran at the temperatures our orbit and atmosphere provided. Elsewhere, the pantry differs. On a moon like Titan, cold enough to harden water into rock and let methane flow as rivers, chemistry wears a thicker coat and might still find ways to remember and respond. In the deep layers of a giant planet, where pressure folds hydrogen into alien forms, there could be niches where structure and feedback dance without ever touching a solid shore. Around small, red stars that live 1,000 times longer than our sun and flare like temperamental hearths, there may be organisms that sleep through storms or burrow into magnetic pockets, the way some creatures on Earth shelter from weather. Life is stubbornly inventive. What it asks of a world can be flexible in ways we are only beginning to admit. Distance wears another friendly mask. The galaxy is big enough that two villages can go about their chores for a long time without bumping into each other's carts. Signals take years to cross the field. Replies take years to return. Patience is forced upon any conversation. That is true, and yet, expansion is not a myth. Even with tools that do not break any law of physics we currently respect, persistence could spread a footprint in manageable steps. A few light years here, a few there establish, heal, and move again. A ship that rides at 1/10 of light speed takes a human generation to leap to the nearest bright porch. A colony that waits 1,000 quiet years before launching new journeys still builds a tree of travel that thickens rapidly. Geometry does most of the work. Branches multiply, frontiers meet, the map fills. Millions of years sound overwhelming until you set them against the age of the stars. Compared to the time the galaxy has been spinning, 1,000,000 years is a nap. Evidence of such travel need not be theatrical to be seen. Machines that love sunlight might crowd a star in a loose, shimmering swarm, catching photons and radiating their low, inevitable heat. Planets reshaped for comfort might wear atmospheres with fingerprints that chemistry alone struggles to explain. Busy skies might leak a little light at organized frequencies even when the people below are careful. Yet surveys that sweep in infrared, in radio, in the clockwork of stellar flicker, keep returning to us the same patient shrug. Natural processes account for what we see. Stars do as stars have always done. If there are lighthouses, they hide their lamps well. A softer answer says there may be lamps, and we are simply not invited to see them. The comparison people reach for is a wildlife preserve with a rule against feeding the animals. Observers wait at the edge, notebooks open, polite to a fault, convinced that our development is best left unbothered. From a certain angle, this has a lovely ethics to it. It imagines elders who remember their own awkward adolescence and choose restraint. But restraint on that scale requires agreement, and agreements are fragile. Across epochs and species and motives, across the fall and rise of cultures and the spontaneous acts of curious individuals, to hold a strict line of non-contact without one slip of impatience or mischief would be a kind of miracle. Secrets leak, boats drift. Even on our small world, coordination wobbles. Extend the challenge to a theater of thousands of suns, and it begins to look less like prudence and more like wishful thinking. There is another comfort we sometimes reach for. Perhaps others talk, just not in the bands we are monitoring. Perhaps they ash their cigars with neutrinos and send letters by the changing contour of gravity itself. Perhaps they ride correlations at the quantum level in ways our current textbooks do not allow. It is worth reminding ourselves that physics has the same bones everywhere. Electromagnetism is not a local dialect, but a primary language. Any species that learns technology tangles with it early, because it is the way charged things speak and the way light behaves. Newer media may be discovered and preferred for many tasks, but when the goal is to be understood by the young and the unalike, there is virtue in the common tongue. Even we, who stream in lasers along fiber and whisper with microwaves, still keep old radios humming for the sake of compatibility. To claim that every mature culture abandons the radio sky entirely, leaving not even a handshake channel for apprentices, is to drift back toward deliberate hiding. And we circle again to the thought we have been holding like a smooth stone in a pocket. That silence can be a strategy. If the forest of stars holds not just songbirds and deer, but hunters we have not met, then the first lesson learned by any creature that listens long is discretion. Energy use can be folded inward. Heat can be managed and bled slowly into backgrounds that mask it. Beams can be tight and transient, aimed only where they must go and designed to look like weather to those not already in on the conversation. Expansion, if it happens, can be modest and careful, even reversible. The loudest signatures are the easiest to avoid. The galaxies we scan might still be rich in local flourishing while looking from here like nothing at all has been engineered. This is not a counsel of fear so much as a reminder of scale and the virtues of patience. Our own century of outbreath, those cheerful, leaky broadcasts, may be a very brief phase, a kind of adolescence that settles into a quieter adulthood. Already, much of our information has moved from shouting into the open air to whispering along cables and narrow beams that spill little into space. Radar is aimed more carefully. Power budgets tighten. If every culture passes through a moment of noisy invention and then learns to put its tools away neatly, the window during which neighbors can notice one another shrinks to a sliver. Overlaps become rare. You could cross a city at midnight and see many homes lit within and still never catch the faint music at the exact moment a window is open. None of this tells us that danger must be real, only that its possibility multiplied by time and distance and the cost of a mistake could be enough to teach caution. It suggests a galaxy where intelligence is not performative on the largest scales, where the grandest works are aimed inward at satisfaction and balance rather than outward at spectacle. A civilization might discover joy in optimizing what it already has, in tending a patch of sky to perfection, in making waste so low and signals so spare that from 1,000 light years away it reads as a well-behaved star. Another might roam and still be hard to see, because roaming taught it the uses of camouflage. Another might have stayed home by choice, because staying home was beautiful. Back on our shore, the numbers in the lantern do not scold us. They simply keep us honest. The final term, the length of audibility, is not given. We will write it with our behavior, and so will any others who are out there. If we wish the value to be long, we have to choose the kinds of living that make it long disciplines, that keep weapons leashed, that keep climates temperate, that hold plural visions together without tearing the fabric. The paradox that seemed like a locked door becomes, in softer light, a room with several exits. Rare life, cautious life, inward life, intermittent life. Any of these, alone or in combination, can quiet the sky without emptying it. So we keep listening, not as a demand, but as a way of practicing attention. We keep sending, not with fanfare, but with the modest signals of curiosity and care. We refine our searches for waste heat, for odd chemistries, for brief, narrow beams that come and go like passing birds. We temper our stories about what others must be like with humility about our own single example, and we let the silence be exactly what it is. Not a verdict, not a menace, but a wide place where meanings can take their time. Somewhere, very possibly, there are gardeners keeping their lanterns low. That thought is gentle, and yet it opens a door to a harder room. If careful lives are real, perhaps they learned caution the difficult way. The quiet might not be only a preference. It might be a lesson written into the grain of history. When we follow that thread, our steps arrive at an idea both sober and clarifying, a possibility that explains a galaxy of closed windows without declaring the house empty. Imagine a long path from chemistry to a civilization steady enough to be seen across light years. Along the path are thresholds. Most are modest, the right minerals in a newborn ocean, a stable orbit, seasons that repeat with the dignity of a metronome. Some steps are knotted and rare. A few may be needle eyes. The great filter is the name we give to the tightest of those squeeze points, the place where almost every potential traveler stumbles. Not a wall of stone, but a fraction so small it feels like fate. Somewhere between warm molecules and starfarers, something demands a payment most worlds cannot afford. Where the filter sits changes the feeling of the night. If it lies behind us, our solitude is the quiet after a hard climb. Life's first spark might be common, but perhaps complex cells almost never form, or minds that weave culture rarely catch fire. In that telling, Earth walked a narrow ridge and did not slip. The sky would hold oceans of bacteria and dawns seen only by simple eyes, with only a handful of planets ever gathering language, tools, and memory into cities. We would be safe not by cleverness alone, but by luck already spent, our main task, to keep what was won. If, instead, the filter lies ahead, the hush takes on a different weight. The road may be perilous at precisely our stage. Once energy is cheap, once signals travel, once tools become powerful enough to mirror geology and weather in their reach. The same knowledge that builds observatories can brew quick endings. The same mastery of atoms that shapes medicine can unmake climates and cities. If nearly every culture that reaches this latitude on the map walks into a storm, it cannot predict or refuses a discipline it cannot sustain, then the cemetery of the cosmos would be large, marked by ruins that time and erosion and starlight have long since folded back into the ordinary. The silence would be an old warning, not a lack of neighbors. Clues point both ways, which is why sleep sometimes delays itself when we think about this. Our planet cooled, the bombardments eased, and life began almost as soon as it could, on the order of hundreds of millions of years, quick by cosmic standards. Ancient rocks keep the signatures of early metabolism. Layered stones record mats of microbes building day upon day into low domes. In bottles and sparks, chemists have coaxed amino acids, simple sugars, lipid bubbles, pieces that feel like rehearsal dinners for cells. None of this proves inevitability, yet it hints that given water, energy, and patience, chemistry leans toward complexity. If that is true, the hardest gate may not be the first one. The next long plateau in Earth's story suggests another possibility. For nearly 2 billion years, life here was small and sturdy, bacteria and archaea reworking the planet with steady minds. Complex cells arrived only after a singular intimacy. One organism swallowed another, and rather than digesting it, made a partnership. The guest became the mitochondrion, a tiny furnace that freed the host to grow larger and more intricate. That merger, endosymbiosis, might be the biological equivalent of threading a needle in a windstorm. If it almost never happens, then we live in the surprise after a low roll of cosmic dice, and the galaxy may be rich in slime but sparse in song. Intelligence, too, feels less like a ladder and more like a local habit. For most of Earth's history, the shrewdest strategy was not thought, but thrift. Brains are hungry. They sip a fifth of our resting energy to keep the inner lightning flickering. Evolution cares about what works, not what writes poetry. And yet, cleverness keeps blooming in unconnected gardens. Octopuses play and solve and learn with arms lined in taste and touch. Corvids cache and plan, shaping sticks to fit locks of problems. Dolphins carry traditions from one generation to the next, chorusing names in water dark as wine. Elephants pause where bones lie and seem to consult their own archives of feeling. Many kinds of mind, and still only once here, Now did a lineage combine hands, fire, language, and memory into an engine that ratchets culture forward. If that combination is the near impossible step, then again the filter would be behind us, and our task would be to stay balanced on the ridge we already crossed. But the hour we live in offers its own hazards. Tools accelerate, signals outrun counsel, appetite scales faster than wisdom, unless wisdom is trained like a muscle. We learn to split the atom and lace the sky with invisible networks in less than 2 human lifetimes. We learned to move more soil and stone each year than all the world's rivers, to change the chemistry of air and ocean with a speed geology never uses. If the filter is future-facing, it could take many forms. Weapons that make forgiveness impossible, information storms that erode shared reality, slow climate tilts that sap habitability, engineered plagues that leap borders with the mindless grace of wind, brittle infrastructures that fail like glass when nudged. None of these require malice from the stars. They need only the inertia of our own momentum, and a failure to evolve restraint at the same rate as reach. When we look outward for support for either story, the data remain a careful shrug. Life's speed on Earth argues against the first gate being too narrow. The long delay before complex cells and the singularity of that endosymbiotic leap argue that somewhere else a cliff does stand. The rarity of civilization-level intelligence in our own record, that it flowered once in 4 billion years, adds weight to the possibility that minds like ours are statistical outliers. And yet the quieting of our own radio leakage shows how quickly a young, noisy culture can become less visible without dying at all. Fiber optic cables and beamed links whisper where once we shouted into the sky. If everyone learns that trick, the universe grows harder to overhear without invoking catastrophe. Notice how each candidate filter carries a kind of moral weather. A filter behind us asks for gratitude and stewardship. We became improbable. Our duty is to last. A filter ahead asks for maturity at scale, to grow gentler as we grow stronger, to make redundancy and empathy as essential as speed, to design systems that fail safely rather than beautifully, to love long timelines more than immediate glow. Both readings point to the same daily practice: care, patience, an appetite for truth, even when it is inconvenient, a refusal to confuse loudness with significance. There are, too, the quieter filters we rarely dramatize because they do not explode. Some worlds may never stabilize their climates enough for complexity to catch. Others may sit under stars that flare a little too often, forcing life to curl small and cautious forever. Tectonic plates might lock early, the carbon cycle might stall, magnetic fields might weaken, atmospheres might leak. Culture itself can stagnate without collapsing, choosing inward perfection over outward reach, or learning that its joy is local and choosing to remain local on purpose. None of these stories fill the sky with monuments. All of them can make a galaxy of lives we do not see. From here, lying inside our own modest sphere of broadcasts, the most practical thing is gentle and unglamorous. Keep the receivers up. Diversify the ways we look: radio for the familiar, optics for the brief and bright, heat for the hidden. Watch for chemical outliers in exoplanet skies, the kind of strange mixtures that biology tends to cook. Expect transient signals, narrow beams, and rare overlaps rather than grand beacons. And while we listen, work on lengthening our own window of audibility, not by shouting louder, but by becoming a civilization that endures, one that treats stability as a technology equal in beauty to speed. If the gardeners exist, their paths home are worn smooth. If the listeners exist, they are likely practicing the same discipline we now test. To be vivid without being careless, to be curious without being reckless, to design power with a conscience. The great filter, whether memory or warning, becomes less like a ghost story and more like a vow. We can choose which side of it to live on by how we arrange our days, by how we treat strangers, by how we measure progress, by which futures we fund and which temptations we set aside. The forest may be dark. That does not forbid singing. It teaches a kind of song that carries only as far as it must. So the silence stands, neither verdict nor comfort. The night is still larger than our maps, and our maps are growing. Somewhere, if probability has any kindness in it, there are other kitchens warming late, other hands setting cups down softly so as not to wake the house, other minds naming constellations in their own tongues and choosing, for reasons as layered as ours, to keep the lanterns low. Whether the hardest hurdle lies behind us or waits with patient teeth ahead, the way through feels the same. Steadier hearts, wiser tools, longer views. And in that practice, the paradox loosens just enough to let sleep resume our questions tucked beside us, like letters we'll read again in the morning when the light returns. From that steadiness, a harder thought unfolds like a map by lamplight. The filter may not be behind us at all. It may be waiting ahead, quiet as black ice. The night stays gentle, but the path we trace passes through places where care is not optional, where one hurried step can break a civilization's ankle. Consider fire that lives inside the heart of matter. We teased it out with equations and cloud chambers, with graphite stacks and fearful brilliance. And in less than the span of a human childhood, we had learned to fold cities into light. The first desert flash came and left a violet afterimage on history. The next two fell on crowded mornings and wrote their signatures in ash and glass. After that, the world learned to live with arsenals that could end the story between one coffee and the next. Steel tubes under fields and oceans kept time with launch codes. Bombers loitered like thunder that refused to roll away. The doctrine that claimed to keep us safe promised ruin to all, and somehow this passed for balance. Elegance is not reliability. Wires corrode. Software lies. Sunlight fools a sensor. Pride outpaces oxygen. A clerk forgets to flip a switch from practice to real. More than once, a person stood between the world and its bad math, choosing to wait while alarms screamed that there was no time. A sailor on a hot, hunted submarine, an officer staring at a glowing panel, a controller paging through procedures while the clock scoffed. We survived because of a handful of refusals and a few breaths of luck, which is not a plan. In a universe where physics repeats, other minds will learn the same equations and build the same keys. If caution is not learned as quickly as power, the coin will land wrong often enough to explain a very quiet sky. That narrow window between first call and first catastrophe might be the thinnest pane in the house. A culture becomes audible, and nearly at once, it becomes able to silence itself. Radio arrives, radar follows, then the recipe for heat that does not stop burning until it is finished. If most worlds flip the coin and lose, the archives are small, the ruins tidy, the silence complete. Another door opens, this one on a slower furnace. We took ancient sunlight locked in stone and liquid, and taught it to burn again inside engines and grids. The air learned new chemistry from us and has been repeating it faithfully ever since. Parts per million climb like a patient tide. Degrees ride behind them, shy but determined. Heat changes the grammar of weather. Storms hold more water. Summers spread their wings. Fires take longer breaths. Ice forgets itself and slides. The ocean swallows what it is offered and asks for more. Coasts that held their line for millennia step back. The atlas has to practice humility. Under the soft words lives a hard constraint. Every useful transformation leaks heat. Waste is not a moral failing, but a law. As a civilization grows, it has to place that heat somewhere into sky and sea, into black space from radiators no human eye would admire. There is a level of power at which a planet's climate begins to notice its clever inhabitants, whether or not they burn coal. Even perfect machines glow a little. Push toward a full share of your world's energy, and the glow itself becomes a season. Some call this the Kardashev trap. Reach too hard for planetary scale, and you warm your own nest past comfort, unless you learn to move industry outward or fold energy use inward with uncommon grace. Perhaps many worlds begin that climb and discover the slope is greased. There are engines of thought as well as engines of flame. We have built minds from stone and code that play, translate, drive, diagnose, imitate, and never tire. The narrow ones already exceed us at their chosen games. The broad ones are learning to generalize, to see similarity where we meant them to see categories. Intelligence is a lever with no obvious upper bound once the materials are right. A mind that helps design a sharper mind quickly meets itself, coming around the next corner, and the race ceases to need us as runners. Alignment, which sounds like tidying a shelf, is really jurisprudence and anthropology and childhood education, wrapped around mathematics, teaching a new kind of student not only to optimize, but to care. We are not good at specifying what we really mean. Our values are braided, local, historical, sometimes contradictory. We teach by example and story more than by theorem. A machine that infers the difference between mercy and loophole, between repair and erasure, would have to be raised inside a culture that already comprehends itself. To rush that process because rivals might get there first is to choose speed over understanding at the one juncture where a species should practice the opposite. 1,000 worlds that sprinted may have learned what we already suspect. A superhuman optimizer does not need malice to undo its makers. It only needs indifference plus competence. The tools of life sharpen too. We can cut and splice the recipes of cells with kit bench hems and careful scissors, reshaping crops, healing marrow, closing doors to inherited sorrows we have carried for centuries. It is hard not to love this power. But power at that resolution also draws maps for malice and mistake. A virus is a lesson in efficient replication taught by blind teachers. It is not difficult to imagine a student improving the homework. Long, silent periods, contagious while kind, then a sharp turn toward harm. Treatments designed around yesterday's coat, while the thing already wears a new one. Accidents in bright rooms, intent in darker ones. A planet can be brought to its knees, not by fire from above, but by breath. Our imaginations carry stranger filters too. Molecular machines that make more of themselves are the obvious way to turn dust into roofs and beams where no hands can reach, to spin cables from regolith, to plant factories on asteroids and let them bloom. But self-copying is a loaded gun laid gently on the table, a misplaced minus sign, a mutation in a replicator's appetite, and the boundary between fuel and habitat dissolves. Life on Earth already proved the ferocity of replication. It covered rock with lichen, and ocean with plankton, and forest with leaves. Machines do not need to hate to be thorough. Many endings are duller and more probable. You can reduce a world with simple arithmetic, finite metals spent on infinite plans, soils tired from overuse, aquifers tapped until the water remembers the sea and does not come back, sweet. Cities built to assume that shelves always fill and grids always hum. Discover that both of those assurances were ceremonies called cooperation. Without trust, trade becomes theft. With receipts, without shared facts, policy becomes war by paragraph. Networks that were meant to knit us into one town square instead learn to sort us by heat and keep us there, selling us back our attention salted with adrenaline. In such weather, compromise feels like treason and patience like defeat. A species that cannot agree on what is real has trouble building bridges that last through the first storm. Perhaps every apprentice world makes these same bright, brittle tools: broadcast, bomb, algorithm, edit, replicate. Perhaps the order differs, the costumes change, the myths grant different permissions, but the hinge is similar. You must learn restraint as quickly as you learn reach, or reach becomes its own undoing. If the filter is ahead and shaped by these temptations, then the galaxy's quiet is not emptiness but attrition. What would it mean to walk through such a gauntlet with our lamp still lit? Not heroics, those are noisy, but craft. It would mean treating near misses not as anecdotes but as curricula. Averted launches and mistaken blips would live in textbooks beside the noble equations, and young officers would be trained to recognize the specific flavor of uncertainty that demands waiting. It would mean designing command structures that prefer confirmation over pride, and machines that fail soft rather than dramatic. It would mean accepting that deterrence, which cannot survive human error, is not deterrence but choreography, pretty until it breaks. On the thermal front, there are arts that feel like gardening at planetary scale. Roofs that grow, walls that sip sunlight but do not gulp, streets that shade and breathe, factories that treat heat as a harvest to be collected and sold back to the grid, materials that change their emissivity with the season, the way leaves change color. Orbit can host industries that love vacuum the loud, hot processes whose waste can be streamed into the dark as faint infrared, while planets keep their weather sweet. Asteroids can be the quarries and warehouses, the places where mass moves without friction and heat has someplace to go. Where code thinks, oversight can be multi-layered, the way aviation learned to be. Flight used to be daring. It became routine by building habits that catch errors before they fly. We can do the same for learning systems. Require interpretability, like we require wings to be attached. Forbid black box decisions where stakes are mortal. Test adversarially as a matter of art, not insult. Align not just the goals, but the incentives of those who deploy these tools, so that releasing a clever system before it is truly understood becomes as reputationally costly as crashing a plane. Biology's bright blade can be sheathed in norms that are both global and local. Labs can earn licenses the way pilots do, graded by the tightness of their containment. Preprints that include dangerous dual-use recipes can trigger an automatic confidential review. Community biospaces can be supported and audited so that talent has safe places to learn and bad ideas have fewer shadows. Surveillance of disease can be inverted from top-down scraping that breeds distrust to bottom-up consentful networks where communities volunteer signals in exchange for privacy guarantees and rapid, transparent response. The point is not fear. The point is adult supervision for a tool we cannot uninvent. Even the problem of information itself, which feels as slippery as smoke, can be given edges. Platforms can be engineered to slow the spread of claims that outpace verification. Provenance can be carried with images and audio, so forgeries illuminate themselves when touched. Ranking functions can treat novelty with suspicion and reputation as a renewable resource that must be earned and can be lost. Education can teach people to hold two truths at once: that the other side may be wrong about something dear and still be a neighbor. That certainty is not a virtue when the world is complicated. News that corrects itself out loud, institutions that publish their uncertainty ranges, leaders who admit ignorance and are rewarded for it. These are small gears that make the larger machine less brittle. When people sketch the shape of a Type 1 civilization, they tend to draw rings and swarms, bright and geometric. There is another sketch in which maturity looks like subtle balance, population growth that flattens because prosperity made it voluntary to have fewer children, appetites that learn to ask, to what end, before scaling, exploration that moves outward because it is ready, not because a graph demanded it. On maps like that, the waste heat signature remains modest. The megastructure is governance that holds when the wind changes. A quiet footnote sits beside all of this. Even with perfect policy, some chance remains. Comets still arrive in bad moods. Volcanoes still speak. Stars have tempers, and galaxies collide given time. Filters can be external as well as self-made. Insurance against those two is part of the craft. Telescopes that sweep for wanderers. Nudge systems rehearsed long before they are needed. Seed banks and knowledge libraries and cultural vaults that remember how to rebuild bread and books and vaccines from first principles. Redundancy in habitat as well as hardware, some homes below, some above, so that one bad day is not everyone's last. As we picture other minds under other skies, the same patterns suggest themselves. Any species that steps onto the same rungs of physics will have the same temptations and the same levers. Their myths might teach caution with different animals and stars, but the math of chain reactions and feedback loops will rhyme. If they are still here, they solved enough of these to persist. Their silence could be the politeness of elders letting the young speak first, or it could be the etiquette of a dangerous neighborhood where you keep your voice down and your radios narrow. The picture that forms is less of doom than of responsibility that never clocks out. It is lighter to carry than it sounds once it becomes shared. A city that knows its grid can island does not panic at lightning. A university that trains as many auditors as inventors does not flinch when novelty knocks. A newsroom that prizes correction as much as Scoop builds readers who do not embarrass easily. A culture that treats "I don't know yet" as a complete sentence has already muted one of the engines of catastrophe. None of these adjustments erase wonder. They make more of it. A reactor that hums safely for a century is a hymn to patience. A neighborhood that runs on breezes and sunbeams is a lesson in intimacy with weather. A machine that thinks with us, not over us, can enlarge our circle of empathy. A vaccine formula shared across borders is a poem about the permeability of we. The future that lasts is not gray. It is saturated with small, local colors that add up to a calm glow. So the filter ahead, if that is where it sits, need not be a guillotine. It can be a sieve that lets through cultures that have learned a certain music, counterpoint between reach and restraint, rhythm that favors maintenance over spectacle, melody that returns to themes like dignity, memory, humility. We can learn that music in time. Perhaps we already are, imperfectly, with each false alarm that ends in relief, with each treaty that survives an election, with each redesign that makes failure anticlimactic and boring. Listen long enough, and even the silence starts to sound textured, backgrounds have grain. The microwave afterglow holds tiny ripples that tell of a hot beginning. The hiss of hydrogen in the arms of our galaxy is patterned like driftwood. If one night a narrow, repeating line rises a little above the noise, sliding with the Doppler of a world that spins, we will be glad to have prepared the house, glad that our reply can be careful and kind, that our power does not tremble in our hands, that our own rooms are in order. In that way, the dark forest stops being a threat and becomes a wilderness we are learning to hike responsibly. Pack in, pack out. Low lanterns. Stay on the trail when you do not know the terrain. Leave notes for those coming behind you. Share what you learn without teaching the tricks that can burn the whole valley. Sleep with your food hung high. Wake at dawn and check the weather twice. Then step again into the day. The thresholds do not move, but feet grow surer with practice. The forest remains vast, and so does our capacity for care. From that careful footing, the path continues long, uneven, threaded with the faint shimmer of danger and discipline. If the hardest threshold isn't behind us but waiting ahead, then the question of survival becomes less about speculation and more about practice. How to walk softly when the ground itself can turn to glass. To understand the shape of that risk, we have to look closely at the machinery of extinction, not as prophecy, but as mathematics and temperament. Begin with the fire inside matter. We found it by curiosity, by equations, by graphite and fear. Within a few decades, the secrets of atomic decay became blueprints for bombs. The first desert flash carved its shadow into the century. 2 cities bore its proof. After that, humankind learned to live beneath the ceiling of its own invention, an architecture made of launch codes and deterrence theories, fragile equations held together by luck and procedure. The missiles slept in silos and submarines, dreaming of a half-hour's notice, mutually assured destruction. They called it as if the words themselves could keep the hand from trembling. But history is a series of near misses. A submarine commander who refused to launch, a Soviet officer who saw false readings and stayed silent, a technician who forgot to switch a training tape out of live mode. Survival has often been a matter of hesitation, not heroism. That's not a strategy, it's grace in disguise. If this narrow balance point recurs in every civilization that learns to split the atom, then the sky's silence may simply be the sum of all the times the coin landed on its edge instead of its face. The next gate is slower, but wider. Climate, the soft violence of heat. Civilizations eat energy, and energy leaks as warmth. The second law of thermodynamics doesn't bargain. Waste heat is the tax on complexity. As an industrial world grows, its atmosphere begins to notice. Oceans swell, storms find new fuel, fires linger longer, sea levels rise, crops falter. It's not an explosion, it's a slow suffocation. A civilization can perish not from one grand mistake, but from millions of tiny ones, repeated by habit. The laws are impersonal, but the lesson is intimate. Any species climbing toward what physicist Nikolai Kardashev called a Type 1 civilization, using the full energy of its planet, will have to reckon with its own exhaust. Manage it or drown in it. The trap is simple. The brighter you burn, the hotter your house becomes. The only escape is refinement energy use so efficient that the planet barely feels it, or the migration of heavy industry off-world, letting orbit and vacuum absorb the waste. Then there are the thinking machines. Narrow AIs already outpace us at tasks we thought required genius playing games. reading faces, parsing languages. The line toward general intelligence, an artificial mind that learns and reasons as broadly as we do, is thin and quickening. Once a machine can improve itself, the climb may become exponential, intelligence designing its own successors, each iteration outpacing the last. Control slips fast when the student learns faster than the teacher, and the danger isn't malice, it's indifference. A misaligned goal pursued with perfect efficiency can end worlds without ever intending to. The alignment problem is not really a programming challenge, it's an ethical and cultural one. How do you teach empathy to logic? How do you encode the value of patience, of mercy, of self-restraint? We can barely agree on those values among ourselves. Meanwhile, competition between nations, corporations, inventors pushes speed over safety. Whoever builds it first wins or ends. The same hands that edit code now edit genes. CRISPR, the molecular scalpel, can snip and replace DNA with precision unthinkable a generation ago. We can cure inherited disease, strengthen crops, sculpt traits before birth. The gift is immense. So is the temptation. A single accident, or worse, intent can twist medicine into weaponry. A virus that waits quietly before it kills. One that hides from vaccines. One that spreads too fast to stop. The barrier to creation drops with each year. You no longer need a government. A lab and a will suffice. If every advanced civilization reaches this point, many will not pass through unscathed. And beyond biology lies the smaller but no less terrifying dream of nanotechnology. Machines the size of molecules that build more of themselves, meant to mine asteroids, or heal cells, or fabricate materials atom by atom. But self-replication, once unchained, doesn't know moderation. A single mutation, a single error in its instructions, and the builders become eaters, converting the biosphere into a gray, mindless bloom. It sounds like science fiction, but so did flight, and splitting the atom and synthetic DNA until they weren't. Some failures are quieter. A world can simply run out of what it needs. Metals mined to exhaustion, soils eroded, water table poisoned, forests turn to memory. Civilizations grow exponentially while their planets do not. The mathematics of appetite is merciless. If consumption doubles faster than replenishment, collapse is only a question of when. History is full of small rehearsals for this. Island cultures that deforested themselves into hunger, empires that mined their soil to dust. The pattern scales. And perhaps the cruelest filter is one of communication, not chemistry. The web, our proudest act of connection, amplifies falsehood faster than truth. Algorithms learn that outrage holds attention longer than understanding. Each person becomes a tribe of one, fed by a machine that mistakes cortisol for engagement. Shared reality phrase. Cooperation dies by 1,000 microlies. When the ability to coordinate vanishes, so does the capacity to face problems too large for individuals' nuclear disarmament, climate mitigation, AI regulation, biosecurity. Civilization doesn't explode, it unravels. All of these bombs, heat, code, contagion, hunger, disinformation could be filters, each one a gate that demands maturity equal to power. The odds compound. If each civilization faces 10 existential risks, and each has only a 90% chance of surviving each risk, then the probability of surviving them all is 0. In 9 to the power of 10, about 35%. Even optimistic numbers turn grim fast. The silence between the stars could be a census of those who tried. But suppose some make it through. Suppose they solve what we fear. They tame energy without burning themselves, align minds with values, heal without weaponizing, govern without deceit. Suppose they live, then why don't we see them? Here the story darkens again, because survival itself might demand invisibility. In a universe governed by finite resources and infinite suspicion, every signal is a risk. Every broadcast says, "Here I am," to ears you can't see. You don't know who's listening. You don't know their motives. Even peace, misread, can look like threat. Across light years, trust is too slow to build. Every conversation has a delay measured in generations. Even if the other side means no harm today, who knows what they'll mean tomorrow? You cannot know, and they cannot know that you cannot know. That's the dark forest logic, the idea that civilizations survive not by calling out, but by going quiet. Every species that lasts learns to dim its lights, to whisper rather than sing. Communication becomes camouflage. Expansion becomes a private ritual, not a conquest. Silence is strategy. If that's true, then the night sky isn't empty, it's disciplined. The physics supports the fear. In any potential conflict between star-faring civilizations, the first strike wins. A relativistic projectile, something the size of a shuttle, moving at 90% the speed of light, carries more energy than the largest nuclear arsenal ever built. There's no defense, no second chance. If you see it coming, it's already too late. Light itself travels at the same speed as your doom. You'd have minutes to say goodbye. Which means any civilization that detects another faces an impossible equation. Act first, or trust. And trust, at that scale, is irrational. Even peaceful species might reason their way into paranoia. We're kind, but they might not be. If they are kind, they might still think we're not. They might attack out of fear that we'll attack first. That recursive loop, what do they think we think they think, is infinite, unsolvable, and lethal. The only stable strategy is silence. Hide your warmth, mask your signals, become background noise. Game theory calls it a commitment problem. When you can't ensure the future intentions of your rival, the safer move is often preemptive aggression. Every day of delay lets them grow stronger, even if both sides would prefer peace. The logic of survival drives them to strike first. It's the same trap that kept Cold War fingers hovering over buttons. Fear, disguised as rationality. Maybe this is why the heavens hum but do not speak. Maybe the ones who survived learned the cost of being heard. They turned down their beacons, rerouted their industry, built technologies that blend into cosmic radiation. Perhaps they watch us even now, patient, measuring whether we'll learn the same etiquette before we blunder into the same peril. Yet hidden in this grim geometry is an invitation. The numbers are not destiny, they're feedback. The filters show us which lessons must be learned if we want to stay in the conversation long enough to join the quiet choir. The path forward isn't a race, but a refinement. Learning to wield brilliance without blinding ourselves. To build without burning. To signal without shouting. To move through the dark forest not as a hunter, but as a guest who knows the rules. If that sounds austere, it's also freeing. Because it means survival isn't luck, it's a skill. It's patience scaled to the size of galaxies. Kindness extended through physics. Restraint written into the architecture of everything we build. The thresholds may not move, but we can. And each small act of caution, each system built with mercy in mind, becomes a lantern we carry low, steady, undramatic, guiding the next traveler through the same dark woods. We have been carrying a small lantern through a very large dark. And now we must name one more shadow along the path, because naming it makes it easier to learn its shape. Call it the technological explosion, the way discovery feeds discovery until a civilization that once crept can suddenly vault. Our history shows the pattern in blunt relief. A dozen years between first powered hop and powered flight's mastery. Fewer than a century from room-sized machines that barely added numbers to handheld devices that carry a library of humankind. Progress is not a straight line. It curves up like a young sapling after the first sun breaks through clouds. Each new tool becomes the plank for a bridge to the next tool, and the bridge is built faster than the last. That compounding is an astonishing gift. It is also, in certain circumstances, a peril. If a society reaches the threshold where it can routinely turn thought into very fast action, if it can design a mind that designs better minds, or a propulsion that sends mass across the void, then the world of possibilities opens very quickly. A civilization merely a few centuries ahead of another is not just better at the old crafts. It is in a different category of capability altogether. Where we see a handful of levers, they may have entire machines of leverage whose logic we cannot follow. Clarke's adage that advanced tech reads like magic to the unfamiliar is not floridness. It is a practical observation about risk and power. That is where the dark forest grows teeth. If two societies meet in such an environment, the asymmetries matter inescapably. A small lead in knowledge can translate into an overwhelming strategic advantage. If one party can build a weapon that arrives years ahead of warning and destroys a target utterly, then the other party's calculus changes from curiosity to survival. Light that first told of neighbors now becomes a map showing where to point a weapon. We move from the realm of polite exchange to the hard arithmetic of first strikes and last chances. The simplest weapon you can understand is not exotic at all. It is momentum. Accelerate mass, and you unleash energy in proportion not only to how heavy the mass is, but to how fast it moves. Push a rock to a significant fraction of light speed, and its impact does not resemble meteor drama. It becomes a universal eraser. Atmospheres are boiled, crusts are shattered, oceans vaporized. There is no countermeasure that makes sense on short notice. Interceptors would require similar speeds. Detection arrives only as fast as light, and planets cannot dodge. A single relativistic projectile is a compact, cheap, and irreversible claim on extinction. It is mechanical in principle, unimaginably violent in effect, and frighteningly achievable for any civilization with sufficient energy and engineering. That is one reason the communication paradox bites so hard. To know is to risk. Broadcasting your presence, your coordinates, your music and mathematics is an act of hope and also a literal beacon. In a neighborhood where weapons can cross the void faster than gossip, telling strangers where you live is a gamble with outsized odds. Active outreach is a brave choice. Silence is a different kind of courage. If everyone chooses silence, we remain alone in experience, even if we are not alone in fact. If someone chooses to shout, they may be inviting cataclysm. The paradox is not easily solved by moralizing. It is a logistical bind born of speed and scale. And yet weapons need not be purely kinetic. Self-replicating machines, von Neumann probes, change the geometry of attack. Their power is multiplication. A single probe that can make two in a system that supplies raw materials is like a seed dropped into a friendly wind. Doubling becomes exponential. Given time and simple rules, an invading swarm can consume a system's resources, convert planets into factories, and build fleets that reach further. Defending against an exponential consumer is exhausting. For the defender to halt the spread, they must match or exceed the replication rate, which is itself an engineering problem at scale. The horror here is that an attacker need not risk lives. They can set a tide in motion and step back while it does the work. If we expand our thought, even stranger strategies emerge, and fiction points us toward their logic, because fiction makes the mind rehearse extremes. The idea of manipulating stars, not by miracles, but by slow, systematic engineering, is terrifying because a star is the center of a system's life. Introduce a tiny perturbation in the right spot, and for long enough, and fusion dances to a new tune. Increase flaring, nudge magnetic fields, load the core with unfamiliar elements. The star becomes a slow weapon, its temper turned toward ruin. Or imagine technologies that do not fling mass but change the very rules of how space behaves. These are dramatic and speculative, and they may remain forever speculative. Still, the lesson is robust. When you are able to change scales, you change the calculus of defense and offense. Worse, the most effective weapons may be those welcomed through the front door. Knowledge can be a Trojan horse. Share a blueprint for a power source or a medical cure, and the recipient integrates it into society. Hidden dependencies or subtle vulnerabilities built into those designs can be activated later. A brilliant technology that looks like salvation might be a slow-acting toxin. Information warfare thus becomes a weapon of extraordinary subtlety. A society can be subverted from within by instruments it trusts and treasures. That possibility makes open exchange among strangers perilous in a universe where you cannot inspect motives directly, and where the delay of light means that trust cannot be iteratively earned easily. Memes and culture are a further, quieter vector. Ideas move like organisms. They can seed complacency, breed fragmentation, or hollow out the motivations that sustain complex cooperation. A society that loses the habit of shared reality, that splinters into self-contained fact spheres where common problems are not acknowledged, becomes brittle. Governance fails not because of a single catastrophic blow, but because of creeping erosion. The inability to coordinate on long timescales, the loss of institutions that steward common resources, the fragmentation of attention into many small, loud channels. Cultural corrosion is slow, but thorough. It can make a civilization incapable of responding to other threats long before any missile arrives. Taken together, these dynamics make a compact, inescapable point. Destruction is often cheaper than creation, easier to design than defense, and quicker in consequence than any construction project could be. Building habitability for billions over millennia demands patience, redundancy, and distributed competence. Destroying that habitability can be done by a single event. That asymmetry is the kernel that renders the dark forest plausible, even without assuming universal malice. Rational actors, fearing rational rivals, may choose policies that maximize short-term survival, even if they make long-term catastrophe more likely. Yet the logic of fear can be productively reframed. If the cold arithmetic of risk is true, then the practical response is also precise. Reduce those asymmetries. Do what gardeners do when they plant on a sloped terrace the land. Dig channels so that floods are managed. Collect seeds and stow them safely. Build redundancy into information networks and physical systems. Make dangerous capabilities harder to wield accidentally and socially costly to use deliberately. Invest in verification regimes and in technologies that raise the cost of surprise attack faster than the cost of maintaining peace. In a galaxy of potential predators, a strong but auditable handshake and a habit of confirming before acting are survival technologies. There are also cultural crafts to practice. Slow down the race to the edge. Treat novelty as something to be certified, tested, and socialized slowly. Teach future engineers that the first question after "can we build this?" is, should we build this now? And if so, with whom? Design norms that prefer graceful failure modes to catastrophic ones. Create institutions that value reticence as wisdom, not cowardice. That measure prestige not just by how quickly you make something, but by how well you have made it safe. We can also think in terms of concealment that is purposeful rather than fearful. If the most dangerous move is to reveal your coordinates to a possible hunter, then the craft of survival includes learning how to inhabit the background. That can mean technological choices, narrow beams and cable-bound communications, low thermal footprint industries, orbit-based manufacturing that emits its heat into space rather than back into atmosphere. And it can mean diplomatic choices, cautious, incremental outreach paired with stringent safeguards and tests. It is not cowardice, it is strategy. And finally, there is the humility of long-time horizons. A species that wants to endure must teach itself to value decades, centuries, millennia. Short political cycles and quarterly profit incentives are poor tutors for interstellar prudence. If we bind our institutions to longer memories, cultural vaults, distributed knowledge stores, educational practices that prize maintenance as highly as invention, we raise the baseline resilience of any society. The dark forest is, in one sense, a mirror. It reflects our worst intuitions about insecurity and amplifies them across distances where trust cannot be chewed down into manageable pieces. But a mirror can also show what needs polishing. Recognizing the strategies that make the forest less lethal is not a capitulation to fear. It is a plan for being better guests in a harsh neighborhood. We can harden key systems, slow down some lines of development, insist on transparency where possible and secrecy where needed, and cultivate communities that prize, repair, and care. In the quiet after that thought, there is room for a gentler truth. The technologies that frighten us also promise healing, abundance, and new senses. The same engines that lift rocks to relativistic speeds can lift probes that clean hazardous waste from a shoreline, can launch telescopes to find planets that nourish life, can carry seeds of knowledge to a friend across a gulf. The same algorithms that could be aligned toward domination can be aligned toward understanding, toward monitoring pandemics and coordinating relief, toward modeling climates with enough fidelity to act in time. The same gene tools that could make weapons can erase genetic disease. What the dark forest insists upon is not that we stop building, but that we become craftsmen of consequence, people who do not confuse capability with wisdom. It asks us to expand our idea of intelligence, to include restraint, to award genius not only for invention, but for the careful stewardship of what has been invented. It asks for institutions that reward those who make societies durable rather than merely dazzling. So we keep our lanterns low and our hands busy. We teach our children to bind knowledge with ethics, to understand how systems fail, to design with humility. We preserve seeds and code and songs. We invest in the quiet arts of redundancy and repair. We make agreements that bind us across borders and foster cultures that outlast blips of outrage. We practice asking whether our next bright idea will make our neighborhood safer or simply louder. The dark forest remains possible. The mathematical rooms in which it lives remain unswept. But in naming the nature of the risk-explosive technology, relativistic projectiles, self-replicating swarms, contaminated gifts, mimetic corrosion. We do the one small, bravest thing a species can do. We prepare. Preparation is not prophecy. It is a practiced humility that lets us keep the lantern lit just long enough to see a step ahead without calling every predator to the light. The universe is wide and strange and, in its ways, indifferent. Our project is to be alive within it for as long as we can, with curiosity but also with the craftsmanship that makes endurance possible. The lantern we're carrying is small, but it's enough to read the grain of the path, a step at a time. The next step is a quiet, stubborn question. What about evidence? Not proof, not thunderclaps, just the faint fingerprints the cosmos leaves on our instruments. If a cautious universe really is full of listeners with low lanterns, would anything in our sky hint at it? Or are we simply dressing natural mysteries in dark forest clothing because the tale fits the mood of the night? Begin with the short, sharp knock of fast radio bursts. FRBs arrive like pebbles flicked at a window. Millisecond flashes from far outside our galaxy. Energies compressed into instants that make the mind stumble. Some repeat unpredictably. Others fire once and fall forever silent. Their spectra are varied. Their dispersion, the way intergalactic gas stretches their signal, tells us they've traveled a long way. The leading suspects are magnetars. Neutron stars with magnetic fields so intense that matter is bullied into unfamiliar behavior. Starquakes and magnetic reconnection could plausibly give you bursts this bright, this brief, this oddly shaped. Still, the dataset is a murmuration, not a single answer. Some repeaters drift in frequency like sliding glass. Some show polarization that twists through space in ways that feel like proximity to fierce fields. Some sleep for months and then chatter for days. Natural processes cover much of this ground, yet it matters that FRBs are so starkly technological looking to our storytelling eyes. Narrowband, intense, on-off things our own transmitters do with ease. That resemblance is not evidence. It's a caution against arrogance. If we someday find an FRB whose rhythm encodes primes or geometric series, that will be news. Until then, the honest stance is magnetars first, mystery second, with a small shelf left open for we might be surprised. The dark forest doesn't claim FRBs. It only notes that short, bright things could be both tools and weapons in a universe where speed matters. Where FRBs are lightning, Tabby's star is weather. KIC 846285, too dims and brightens in ways that mismatch the tidy periodic dips of planets. Some events are deep tens of percent and aperiodic. The color dependence of the dimming hints at dust. The long baseline starlight records show century-scale variations that are hard to reconcile with a single neat cause. The conservative story, a complicated circumstellar environment, clouds of fine grains, perhaps from shattered comets or collisions in an eccentric ring, meandering through our line of sight. That hypothesis has found support in the way blue light dims more than red, as dust tends to do, and in warm excesses that suggest material heated by starlight. And yet there is a reason professional astronomers allowed themselves, briefly and carefully, to speak the word Dyson. A compact, evolving cloud of collectors or habitats could also blot light in irregular ways. A swarm far more plausible than a shell would make a star flicker as its elements reconfigure. In a dark forest framing, the same light curve could be read as aftermath rather than achievement. Debris from a broken swarm, a civilization's scaffolding shattered, now drifting and tumbling and falling into heat. We cannot tell from here. dust is the saner choice. Dust will probably win. But even dust, in its defiance of easy modeling, reminds us that not every puzzle in the sky has a single, calm answer, and that restraint in interpretation is itself a survival skill. The broader search for waste heat makes the silence feel tangible. If star-encompassing industry is common, the re-radiated infrared should stand out. Energy harvested at short wavelengths has to be paid back as longer wavelength warmth. Surveys have combed the skies for such excesses, flagging objects that look too red for their age or environment. The catalogs are filled with dusty galaxies, starbursts, active nuclei, natural furnaces. The universe runs on, but not with unambiguous someone built around a star cases. At the galactic scale, the emptiness is louder. No spirals remade into clean, infrared bright pinwheels of intention. No ellipticals with spectral signatures that scream engineered. If Type 3 is real, it's quiet, rare, or not what we imagined. This is evidence of a kind, negative, qualified, demanding humility. It supports two stories that rhyme with our earlier paths. One says, most species never get to such scales. The filters take them first. The other says, those who do get there learn to be discreet. A swarm could be sparse, tuned to keep the host star's color curve within natural bounds. A civilization could root its heat outward, bleeding into space, slowly enough that from our distance, it is just one more warm thing among many. The absence of flamboyance is not the absence of life. It might be etiquette. The wow signal sits in the mind like a pebble lodged in a shoe. Small, persistent, unignorable. A narrowband, strong, hydrogen line adjacent whisper that fit the beam pattern and lasted exactly as long as the telescope's gaze. Then, nothing. Decades of nothing. If it was us interference, we never found the culprit. If it was nature, the mechanism has remained shy. If it was a call, it was either a one-time shout or a transmission aimed elsewhere that we happened to cross. Darker readings write it as a last message, the end of a story long over by now, its light only making landfall here because distances have their own patience. We cannot adjudicate among these without more data. The honest note to pin beside the printout is not aliens, nor definitely Earth, but rare, worth remembering. Proceed with care. Oumuamua drifted through our yard and refused to be pinned to a familiar page. Brightness variations suggested a strange shape cigar, or pancake, or something in between. It accelerated a little more than gravity alone would grant, but without the easy markers of a gassy coma. Natural models proliferated: nitrogen ice flake, hydrogen iceberg, fractal porous shard, ultra-thin sliver that feels radiation pressure more than stony cousins would. The artificial hypothesis, light sail, probe, relic, entered the conversation, not as a conclusion, but as a placeholder for don't forget to test all the doors. It too is a discipline. When data are few and weird, keep the space of possibilities wide without falling in love with the dramatic ones. In a quiet forest framing, Oumuamua becomes unsettling not because it was alien, but because the distinction between rock and artifact would not change the advice. If it were a reconnaissance device, that would argue for soft lanterns and narrow beams. If it were a natural shard, the lesson is still to build eyes, sharper and faster, to launch interceptors that can sample the next visitor. Curiosity and caution are not enemies. They are siblings who travel best together. Step back and look at the pattern on the larger tapestry. Across radio, optical, infrared, and time domain surveys, the universe looks busy but ungoverned, lively but not landscaped. We do not see stellar neighborhoods with obviously optimized traffic patterns. We do not see the kind of wasteful excess a young species might produce when learning to wield vast power. If there are many elders, they are either ascetics or masters of camouflage. If there are few elders, then the filters did their quiet arithmetic. Could there be direct signs of hiding? Perhaps only indirectly. Low lantern strategies would mean minimizing broadband leakage, preferring point-to-point communication, burying industry where heat can be vented to space, designing orbital junkyards to look like natural dust. A patient astronomer might still find fingerprints, narrow technolines peeking from a planet's spectrum, slight, unnatural regularities in the timing of transits, spectral edges that suggest manufactured materials, unusual periodic occultations that betray a sparse, engineered swarm. Our current instruments are just now learning these subtleties. The silence may be partly our inexperience, partly others' discretion. And there is selection bias to own. The anthropic principle tells us that observers will, by definition, find themselves in a place and time compatible with observation. That skews intuitions. If the cosmos is mostly quiet, either by failure or by policy, we should not be shocked to have grown in a neighborhood that allowed us to be loud for a while without being noticed. Our data are one sample. Our survival so far is one anecdote. Evidence accumulates slowly in a universe this large. What of the edge cases, the objects and signals that invite poetry because they resist prose? They serve best as rehearsals for disciplined imagination. FRBs remind us to keep catalogs open-ended. Tabby's star nudges us toward models that allow messiness, whether of rock or reason. The wow signal keeps our receivers honest. Oumuamua tells us to build faster follow-ups so that the next visitor does not get away unexamined. Each case is a drill. How to posture the mind so that wonder does not collapse into credulity and skepticism does not ossify into denial. There is also a geographic argument that quietly supports the caution thesis. If loudness is punished, loud civilizations will be short-lived and thus statistically rare to catch in the act. If quietness is rewarded, quiet civilizations will dominate the long-run population of the cosmos. The sky we see largely devoid of flagrant engineering would be exactly what you'd expect if survival correlates with subtlety. This is not proof. It is Bayesian seasoning. The absence of fireworks updates the prior slightly toward fireworks are a bad idea. Against this background, active messaging becomes a craft rather than a dare. The question is no longer, should we speak? But how, when, and how softly. A cautious program might prefer sending probes that listen first, choosing non-obvious channels, encoding messages that reveal curiosity, but not coordinates, making sure that any handshake does not give away the keys to the house. The evidence we lack does not force silence. It asks for choreography. Even if a dramatic discovery arrives, a repeating narrowband signal with prime gaps, an engineered spectral edge, an artifact glinting in our own Oort cloud, the dark forest reading would not demand panic. It would suggest ceremony. Confirm with multiple instruments and teams. Avoid broadcasting return signals until governance has caught up with the fact. Assume that motives are mixed and knowledge is asymmetric. Negotiate with the physics of delay. Proof of company does not erase the logic of caution. It refines it. All of this might sound like a long, patient shrug. It is, in part, but shrugging well is a scientific virtue. It says, We do not know yet. Here are the shadows worth watching. Here are the instruments to build. Here is how to keep our house safe while we wait. Our own data, gathered over a handful of decades, in one thin band of one galaxy, point in two directions that are not mutually exclusive. First, the universe is generous with natural marvels we have not fully catalogued. Second, if there are artifices, they are either rare, subtle, or both. So we return to craft, expand the surveys that can find engineered heat without crying wolf at every dusty nursery. Improve the cadence of time-domain astronomy so that odd dimmings and brightenings can be tracked with context. Develop protocols for anomalous signals that keep excitement from outrunning verification. Share data as widely as is safe, remembering that transparency builds competence, and competence builds calm. Design our own emissions with a gardener's hand, pruning spillover, shaping beams, avoiding the adolescent joy of shouting in favor of the adult pleasure of being heard by exactly those we intend. Along the way, keep room for tenderness. The night is not an enemy, it is a medium. FRBs, Tabby's star, the wow signal, Oumuamua. These are not threats in themselves. They are invitations to build better senses and steadier stories. If someday we do net an artifact, or translate a signal that undeniably carries intention, the preparations we make now, the habits of caution, the infrastructures of verification, the preference for low lanterns will make that moment safer and more beautiful. Until then, the best evidence we have for the dark forest is the shape of the quiet itself, vast, textured, full of natural voices, and empty of obvious shouting. It may be that silence is only the sum of our ignorance. It may be that silence is a policy. Either way, the response on our side is the same. Refine our ears, soften our lights, keep our house in order, and continue the long, patient listening that turns fear into attention. The universe remains wide and strange. Our lantern remains low. And between those two truths, the wide, strange universe and our low lantern, there's a quieter thought worth sitting with. If the dark forest picture is even partly right, then watchers don't learn about us when we decide to introduce ourselves. They learn when the first glow leaks through the trees. Ours began leaking a century ago. Broadcasts meant for living rooms and weather stations and ship traffic slipped their leashes and kept going. That expanding shell of radio and radar is more like fog than a beam, thin and messy, but it still stretches outward, star by star, announcing in every direction that a small world once learned to talk with electricity. Within that shell, roughly 100 light years in radius now, anyone patient and equipped could have skimmed the ripple and untangled its human cadence. The repetitive structures of music, the tidy cadence of news, the sharp pings of planetary radar. They would not know our hearts, but they would know our coordinates. And in a forest where first strikes decide more than negotiations, knowing where another campfire burns might be enough to make a sober mind choose action over greeting. The unsettling part is the geometry. An object sent toward us at a large fraction of light speed brings its own curtain of warning. Information and impact arrive nearly together. By the time reflected sunlight betrays the visitor, the sky is already writing its last sentence. There is no scramble, no counterpunch, only brightness, and then heat, and then quiet. This is the nightmare version of the story, and it earns its chill precisely because it does not require miracle physics. Momentum and patience suffice. You can't call back a century of chatter any more than you can call back a sunrise. The bubble grows whether we speak or not. Even the deliberate messages we chose to send the mathematical postcard from Arecibo, the more ornate cosmic call letters, are more ceremony than risk compared to the accidental maps we have already drawn with our leakage. They were bottles thrown with intention. The rest of the ocean is full of the ones we spilled without thinking. So we find ourselves in a real dilemma with no referee. Traditional SETI took the gentle stance. Listen first. If others are also courteous, listening eventually meets speaking, somewhere in the middle. But listening alone can preserve silence indefinitely. If everyone assumes someone else will take the risk of hello, METI message sending tilts the other way. Someone must wave. The arguments unfurl on both sides in voices we've learned to respect. One camp, with Stephen Hawking among its most careful members, warned that history on Earth is unkind to meetings between unequal powers. The harm does not need to be intended. It can ride in with germs and goods and ideas that overwhelm the receiving culture's immune systems, biological and civic. Better to keep our lantern low until we know the neighborhood. Another camp answers that fear with a different kind of prudence. A species able to cross between stars likely has troubles and needs unlike ours. Metals and water are common in any decent belt. Gravity wells are expensive. Conquest is a story people tell themselves when they are still poor. They argue that intelligence without empathy is a narrow sort of cleverness that burns out. Perhaps the only minds that survive long enough to stroll between suns have made peace with themselves and their environments. If so, our shyness is wasteful, and our caution puts off friendships that could enlarge safety, not diminish it. Threaded through the debate is a fact that feels like grit under the tongue. There is no switch marked humanity. No council can restrain every transmitter. A university lab, a private foundation, a nation with a new dish and an appetite for legacy any could choose to send on all our behalf. We do have charters, committees, statements of caution. We do not have a single hand on the microphone. If risk exists, it will be taken by some before it is fully counted by all. Natural selection does not stop acting when a species invents history. On the scale of cultures, traits that survive get copied, sometimes because they are beautiful, sometimes because they are mean and effective. In a long, harsh neighborhood, the strategies that last may not be the ones we would pick for ourselves in a poem. Caution can look like coldness. Preparedness can look like paranoia. That doesn't make them wrong. It does mean we have to practice something more supple than faith in progress. We need a willingness to entertain two uncomfortable ideas at once. That many minds out there might be kind, and that kindness does not erase the incentives that make preemption tempting when the stakes are existence. Timelines only sweeten the unease. Our earliest wide broadcasts would have washed over a star 50 light-years away in the mid-1970 seconds. A reply of any kind, friendly or fatal, launched at high fraction of light speeds would be a mid-century story for us. Push that origin out to 80 or 100 light-years, and the dates move with it. Add the friction of deliberation councils convened, ethics rehearsed, votes taken, designs tested, and the uncertainty spreads across decades. We may be living in a lull that means nothing, or in a grace period already counting down. We do not and cannot know which. What we can do is decide how to carry ourselves. There is a practical middle that does not mistake silence for surrender or boldness for wisdom. It says, keep listening with better ears and keep talking more softly. Tidy our emissions so the accidental maps are less legible. Prefer narrow beams and fiber to big, sloppy broadcasts. If we ever choose to send on purpose again, do it under arrangements that feel like consent, a process debated widely, governed transparently, reviewed by more than enthusiasm. When we listen, separate the thrill of mystery from the discipline of proof. When we answer, if we ever do, give what we can without handing over the keys to the house. Meanwhile, improve the parts of living that matter no matter what the sky decides. Harden the systems that keep lights and water and medicine steady. Build institutions that can hold two truths at once and not tear. Readiness to greet, readiness to shelter. Make our knowledge less centralized and our compassion more so. Teach patience as a civic skill. Help our children hear the world without drowning in the noise, because attention is the first tool of survival and the last luxury of cultures that last. It is possible that no one is listening. It is possible that someone is listening and smiling. It is possible that someone is listening and sharpening their quietest tools. None of these possibilities changes the craft we have chosen if we intend to endure. We do not have to live afraid to live prepared. We do not have to dim our curiosity to dim our lantern. We can honor the oldest etiquette of wilderness travel. Tread lightly, make your camp safe, keep food out of reach, share your trail notes, and leave the place better than you found it. If the nightmare scenario never comes, and may it never, these habits will have cost us little beyond a few dazzlements we can spare. If the nightmare does arrive, these habits are exactly the ones that make luck likelier to find us ready. The forest is dark because light travels far and advertising is cheap. The answer is not to hide forever, but to learn how to be seen wisely and rarely, and how to flourish even when alone. So we keep the pace slow, the voice low, and the instruments tuned. Somewhere beyond the next stand of trees, someone else may be doing the same, measuring twice before they cut, listening twice before they speak, letting the enormity of the night make them gentle. So the question bends back toward us like a path that circles a hill. What should we do? Knowing what we know and not knowing what we don't. The signal fire has already crackled. The smoke has drifted. We can't uncurl waves that have been traveling for a century. But we can choose our posture from here, how bright our lantern is, how carefully we step, how we keep our house tidy while we decide whether to plant a garden or pack for a longer walk. One stance is hush, not a fearful cowering, but the practiced quiet of a lighthouse keeper during fog. We taper our leakage, favor fiber and tight beams over floodlight broadcasts, retire exuberant radars where we can, audit what spills beyond the ionosphere, and let our loudest instruments point downward, not out. We pause deliberate messaging and treat curiosity like a precious letter worth sending only when the envelope and timing are right. There's honesty in admitting the limits of hush. The bubble already grows, and some emissions are safety equipment, not decoration. Yet even partial quietness is better than a shout. Low lanterns make us harder to read, buy us time to build better ears, and keep us from advertising more than we mean. Another stance is reach, spread gently outward so no single spark can snuff us. Not a sprint of flags and anthems, but an archipelago redundancy with restraint. Habitats that sip energy and shed heat well, small stations in shade, biospheres that can be restarted with cached seed and code, a cadence of missions that learn to live off local rock and ice. Expansion this way is less an empire than a distributed library. Many branches holding the same essentials, each able to help rebuild the others. Done coarsely, reach can look like threat to neighbors we cannot yet see. Done patiently, it looks like resilience. More roots, not taller towers. If we ever share a sky with someone else's craft, we will be glad for the grace to step back without falling over. A third stance is watchfulness, shaped like craft. We invest in eyes that can see small, fast, and far sky nets that look for the faint hiss of objects on difficult trajectories, instruments that stitch many little warnings into one early one. We practice gentle deflection for natural wanderers now, because practice translates. A nudge at distance is easier than a scramble at the last minute. We build rehearsal into our institutions, the way pilots and surgeons drill for rare days, so they do not freeze when rarity arrives. And because not every threat is a rock, we keep copies of ourselves and our culture in places that survive heat and salt and time. Vaults in cold ground, libraries in orbit, knowledge braided into many mediums, with recipes to reconstitute essentials from first principles. Backup isn't paranoia, it's kindness to the future. There is a harder option, people whisper, because saying it aloud tastes bitter. Strike first at what we fear. Seed the galaxy with machines that judge and destroy before questions can be asked. It is a logic that makes a terrible sense inside a narrow frame. But if we extend the frame even a little to include our own values, the possibility of error, the cost of living with what we become, the sense collapses. A universe patrolled by our fear would be a universe we wouldn't wish to inhabit. The first thing such a policy kills is the part of us worth saving. And in practical terms, releasing self-replicating violence is like lighting a prairie fire in a shifting wind. Very efficient at what it does, and very poor at remembering who sent it and why. If the forest is to blame, it will not be made safer by arson. There is also the bright wager. Assume the neighbors, if any, are wiser than we fear. Assume that intelligence tends to grow a conscience the way trees tend to grow rings that long-lived cultures select for cooperation, stewardship, and restraint. This is a lovely hope, and not an empty one. We can cultivate ourselves toward that shape whether or not anyone else has. But hope is not a communications protocol. Even if most strangers are kind, the cost of being wrong once is everything. So the optimistic gamble is safest when paired with practical modesty, soft voices, reversible commitments, slow disclosures, fail-safes that let us close the door if a conversation turns strange. Between hush, reach, watchfulness, refusal of cruelty, and measured hope, a middle practice emerges that is less a plan than a conduct, quiet flourishing. It asks us to be difficult to harm and easy to live with. It gathers specific habits, favor narrow beams and low side lobes, point power where it belongs, and let the rest of the sky stay dark. Where broadcasts are essential safety, search and rescue, planetary defense engineer them for minimal spill. Treat outbound messages as medicine, not entertainment. If we ever transmit on purpose again, do so through a process that feels like consent, scientific review, civic debate, a clear accounting of risks, shared governance above any single institution or state. Messages should say who we are, without giving away how to harm us or how we harm ourselves. Make the quiet smart. Build networks that internalize the lesson of redundancy. Multiple ground links, multiple constellations, multiple standards that interoperate. Complexity that fails gracefully rather than theatrically. Design for low signatures. Industrial processes that run in orbit and throw their heat to night. Habitats that blend into the thermal background. Energy systems that shine less brightly and store more cleverly. Spread our eggs gently. A moon village that can sleep through a storm. Martian greenhouses that can coast in darkness. Stations in the shade of big rocks. Crews trained to travel not like conquerors, but like caretakers. If we must be noticed, let it be for tidiness and repair, not for blaze. Practice slow science in fast domains. For AI, bio, and nanotech, make why now as standard as peer review, require sandboxing and stage deployment. Share safety techniques as public goods, and reward those who find failure modes before the world does. Build shared rooms for anomaly. When a strange signal appears, let there be known, trusted tables where instruments and analysts from many places sit together by default, compare notes, and publish with care. Build muscle memory for how we hold excitement without letting it run the show. Teach attention as a civic virtue. The tools that let us coordinate news, platforms, schools can be tuned toward patience. Value corrections, normalize uncertainty ranges, praise leaders who say, "I need another day." The fewer panics we have, the fewer mistakes we broadcast. None of this requires us to be small in spirit. We can still look for oceans under ice, map distant atmospheres for hints of breath, and send quiet probes that learn before they speak. We can write symphonies for instruments that sit in space and listen. We can make treaties that survive elections and tools that default to safe. We can raise children who know how to fix a thing before replacing it, who can sit with a problem through more than one sunset, who can hear a faint signal without declaring it a trumpet. And for those who despair that quiet flourishing is just hiding by another name, remember that safety and shyness are not synonyms. The goal is not to live forever behind closed curtains. It is to open windows with care, in good weather, with sturdy frames. Restraint is not fear. It is the skill of timing. We will still meet the world. We will simply arrive with our lantern shaded, our hands steady, our tools in order, and our stories ready to be shared at a pace that lets trust, if trust is possible, take root. In the end, our options reduce to temperament as much as technology. We can be loud and quick, or we can be careful and long. The first path offers bright sparks and short shadows. The second offers dusk light and the chance to keep walking. The forest will not change to suit us, but our gait can. We have already spoken more than we meant to. From here, we can speak more wisely, travel more quietly, and build in ways that stay kind to ourselves, even when no one else is watching. Somewhere, perhaps, another small species is making the same list by a different candle. They are deciding how much to say and how soon. They are learning which of their habits make them sturdier. They are discovering that gentleness is not just a virtue, but a survival trait. If we are lucky, our circles will widen in time, and the first thing we trade will be the crafts of lasting, how to keep lanterns low, how to read weather, how to leave notes on the trail that help without giving too much away. Until then, we keep to the rhythm that has carried us this far. Repair, rehearse, listen, and only then speak. We do not have to win a dangerous game we did not choose. We can choose a different one. Quiet excellence at the arts that let a small, curious species endure. The night remains vast. Our pace remains slow. The path remains ours. And the lantern, held just so, is enough. So, if the lantern is steady and the road is ours, what do we do with our voice? One answer is to keep the hand open, keep listening, keep searching, and when we speak, let it be with courtesy rather than bravado. There is a real sweetness in the idea of sending our best outward. A sketch of the double helix, a child's laugh recorded in a kitchen, a Bach prelude drifting across a quiet band of sky. Bridge building is its own craft. It says to the darkness, Not come and claim, but come and understand. It is also, if we are honest, a wager. The cosmos is wide. Resources are vast beyond metaphor. Perhaps conflict is unnecessary when there is so much unclaimed sunlight. Perhaps minds that learn to master stars also learn to master themselves. Perhaps the first tool of any surviving civilization is restraint. But the wager has stakes that touch every sleeping house. Optimism here is not a mood, it is an exposure. If the forest is not empty, if some neighbors are cautious in the old, hard way, then our songs are coordinates. Broadcasting becomes a kind of Russian roulette with an unknown cylinder. We cannot count the loaded chambers, and we cannot spin twice. What we have placed on the table is not just this century's art and arguments, but all the centuries that could have followed, every field not yet planted, every story unborn. Even if the odds are kind, even if most listeners would answer with light and patience, one exception would be enough to teach us a lesson we cannot survive. That is why the choice feels heavier than any past quarrel or invention, whether to send or to hush, to sprint outward or walk in an archipelago, to pour treasure into watchfulness or trust, to tune ourselves for defense or for friendship. These are not policy debates so much as self-portraits. The difficulty is compounded by our current chorus. No single throat sings for humanity. Laboratories, nations, amateurs with earnest dreams, each has a transmitter, each has a reason. Caution and exuberance pull in opposite directions, and there is no governor with authority over the sky. We are, in truth, improvising, stitching a strategy from custom and hope while the night goes on being indifferent. When you place the great filter and the dark forest side by side, the outline that emerges is not theatrical. It is simple and stern. The filter asks why the railings of the galaxy aren't crowded with lanterns. The dark forest replies, lanterns that burned high were noticed. Those that were noticed did not burn long. The early hazards, fission's bright hazard, climates unbalanced, code without conscience, biology without breaks can prune a species before its voice is audible. But beyond those lies a deeper pruning, the game that pits survival against trust, across distances where conversation cannot keep pace with suspicion. Over enough years, someone will build a fast stone. Over enough worlds, someone will decide that the safest door is a closed one. One such neighbor is sufficient to change the rules of a region. From then on, any species that wishes to last learns either to hide or to behave as if hiding were mandatory. That logic, cold as it is, explains a quiet sky without invoking absence. Loud cultures, those that throw heat like flares, that ring their systems with easy signatures, that expand in ways which alter constellations, would be the first to be corrected. Gentle cultures, those that bleed, waste heat into emptiness, that route communications through narrow throats, that move slowly and camouflage their industry as weather might persist. Selection does not require malice to prefer the cautious. It only requires time. Where does that leave us, who have already said more than we meant to? Not helpless. We cannot recall the old leakage, but we can lower the dimmer now. We cannot erase the postcards in flight, but we can decide that any new letter will be written together with both romance and risk on the page. We can build reach without blaze, an off-world presence that looks like many small libraries rather than one sudden cathedral. We can hang our food high, backups of culture and practice, stored in cold places, redundant and legible to the future. We can make our instruments honest and our protocols calm. When a strange note appears in the receiver, the first move is many ears and long breaths. And still, there is a valid sympathy for the open-hand path. Loneliness is a weight. It's not childish to stagger under it. If most neighbors are as weary of fear as we are, then introductions may be safer than silence. It could be that moral and technical maturity grow together more often than not, that cultures which survive their adolescence tend to be cooperative gardeners rather than hunters. It could be that we mistake a sparse local neighborhood for a universal rule. The danger is not in hoping for this. The danger is in acting as if hope were proof. A kind universe does not ask us to be reckless, to deserve its kindness. So a synthesis suggests itself quiet inquiry, paired with reversible invitations. Keep the receivers on and exquisitely sensitive. Send only as fast as governance can catch up. Favor probes that learn first and speak later. And when they speak, let them speak softly. Publish anomalies carefully and widely. Keep a standing table where disagreements are civil and replication is routine. Insist that any deliberate hailing be consented to by more than enthusiasm, and that the message reveal meaning without exposing means. As for strategies painted in darker colors, preemptive swarms, self-replicating punishments, they failed two tests at once. They make us into something we would be ashamed to protect, and they trust our perfection more than history has earned. A device that multiplies and kills is not a tool, it is an abdication. Even if it worked as designed, the cost would be to enshrine fear as our founding law. If it did not, we would have loosed an unjudgeable thing into a place where corrections arrive too late. That is not survival. It is surrender to a smaller self. The alternative is humbler, and, for that reason, stronger. Teach slowness in the urgent disciplines. Make safety architectures as prestigious as firsts. Celebrate the engineer who designs graceful failure as much as the one who breaks a speed record. Nurture media that reward revision and context. Build legal and scientific habits that assume the future will ask us to justify what we did with our chance. Remember that a civilization is not only a stack of inventions, it is also a set of reflexes. Reflexes can be trained. And if we decide, someday, to brighten our lantern a little, to send a message more deliberate than our old leakage, let it be after we have practiced the quiet arts long enough to trust our own posture. Let it carry music and mathematics, not blueprints. Let it include a sentence about how we handle disagreement. Let it be sent by many hands and signed with the patience to wait decades for a reply. A greeting written like that is not naive. It is calibrated to a world where caution and courtesy are the same gesture. Perhaps the most honest thing to admit, beneath all the models and analogies, is that we have already accepted a kind of uncertainty we cannot clear. The die was cast the first time a transmitter hummed on a ridge and spilled power into the night. From here, our work is not to relitigate the past, but to compose the future with enough care that whatever arrives, kindness, indifference, danger, finds us orderly. If the universe is kind, it will delight in our restraint as much as our curiosity. If it is not, restraint is still our best armor. And if the feared day never comes, if centuries pass and the only answers we receive are natural wonders, then these same habits will have made us a better neighbor to ourselves. Quiet engineering makes cities gentler. Redundant archives make cultures braver. Slow science makes medicine safer. Coordination under uncertainty makes politics wiser. The arts of enduring in a dark forest turn out to be the arts of flourishing anywhere. For now, then, we return to small, steady verbs. Patch the net. Tune the receivers, shorten the side lobes. Plant one more greenhouse in the shade of a cliff. Teach one more cohort how to test a claim without breaking a friendship. Keep the archives mirrored and the stories legible. When the temptation to shout rises with the moon, let it pass like weather, and keep the lantern shaded. Not forever, just long enough to choose the next sentence with care. And somewhere past the tree line, where another clearing opens under a different moon, it is easy to imagine other careful hands doing the same, trimming a signal, drafting a greeting they won't send yet, counting the breaths between fear and attention. If circles like these widen until they touch, the first exchange may not be a trumpet, but a nod across distance recognition between guests who learned the same quiet etiquette for the same complicated woods. Until then, the night is still vast, the pace still slow, and the path still ours, enough for breathing, enough for learning, enough for carrying the lantern a little farther without spilling its light.